The instant an avoidant individual returns, you possess all the influence they assumed you would never acquire. They do not reappear without a motive. Your withdrawal produced a transformation they did not anticipate. Currently, they are the ones pursuing a bond. An avoidance return is never a coincidence. It is a reaction to the emotional void they once presumed you would never permit. When you finally ceased overextending, over-explaining, and over-giving, they sensed the disappearance of the emotional entry they previously took for granted. It is not your demands that draw them. It is the constancy, the security, and the compassion you provided without ever requesting anything in exchange. When that frequency vanishes, it compels even the most detached avoidant to face reality. You are no longer pursuing them. That quietness became more resonant than every dialogue you once pleaded to have. This is where your strength originates. It is found not in your words, but in the person you evolved into while they were away. You did not merely distance yourself from them, you detached from the version of yourself that settled for fragments instead of true connection. Avoidants return because their internal alarm system is triggered not by your closeness, but by your absence. They anticipated you would stay reachable indefinitely. They expected that regardless of how far they retreated, you would emotionally sustain the connection for both of you. The second they observe that link break, the distress begins. It is the muted internal panic they never display but always endure. When they do come back, you are no longer obligated to perform, to justify, or to soften your edges to accommodate their emotional restrictions. You are not present to comfort them or to reconstruct the foundation they repeatedly damaged. Your sole responsibility is to inhabit the power you cultivated while they were gone. The version of you they abandoned is not the version they are encountering today. That discrepancy is why the power dynamic reverses. They move forward with hesitation. You reply with transparency. They provide crumbs. You offer boundaries. They search for solace. You safeguard your tranquility. This stage is not about spurning them out of resentment. It is about acting from the serene place you gained through recovery. The avoidant returns expecting the same emotional terrain. The empath who absorbed their coldness, the heart that excused them, the spirit that lingered. Instead, they encounter someone centered, self-assured, and no longer willing to bargain regarding their value. You do not react. You witness. You do not chase. You decide. You do not slide into the old habits. You stand firmly on new ground. That is what alarms them most. It is not your dismissal, but your transformation. When you finally claim your power, the dynamic they counted on evaporates. The avoidant who once fled now stands motionless, confronting the results of their own emotional evasion. You finally grasp that the moment they return is not a request to reconcile. It is evidence of how much you have thrived without them. Avoidants anticipate emotional intensity or approval, but your neutral delivery communicates everything. You are no longer the person they could emotionally evade. When an avoidant comes back, they instinctively look for the former pattern where your heart rushed to bridge the gap, where your excitement saturated every word, and where your feelings occupied the area their distance created. They expect you to be relieved, eager, and perhaps even thankful. They seek the familiar emotional buffer that made their detachment feel harmless. Yet, when you answer with steady neutrality, the entire script falls apart. Your stillness becomes the communication they never anticipated. It is not an angry or cold silence, but a composed one. The type that does not penalize but clarifies. The kind that demonstrates you are no longer emotionally hooked on their inconsistency. This is the point where they realize the emotional authority you once surrendered so easily has returned to its true owner. Nothing unbalances an avoidant more than a person they believed would always be emotionally reachable suddenly becoming indifferent. Remaining calm does not mean faking it. It means you truly do not feel the same internal desperation you once did. It means their reappearance does not ignite the old anxiety. You are not emotionally triggered by their presence, their apologies, or their attempts to reconnect. You view it for exactly what it is, a cycle, a habit, and a reflex sparked by your absence. Instead of fueling it with sentiment, you acknowledge it with discernment. When you respond without over-explaining or bending to make them comfortable, the avoidant encounters something they rarely face: accountability. This is not the kind you demand through conflict, but the quiet kind that arises from no longer matching their avoidance with your availability. They can no longer mask themselves behind the pretext of being overwhelmed, because your serenity eliminates all pressure. They can no longer claim they withdrew because things were too intense, because your energy is centered and poised. Your neutrality places the focus exactly where it belongs, on their erratic behavior rather than on your heart. The avoidant becomes intensely observant in this moment. They notice your inflection, your pauses, and your directness. They feel the change even if they never voice it. This is not the person who once sat waiting for their messages or tried to interpret their silence. This is not the person they could leave temporarily and expect to find unchanged. The version of you they face now possesses emotional self-respect, and that is more disarming to an avoidant than any argument could ever be. Peace is your advantage because it signals the one thing an avoidant never expects. You no longer require their validation. When you are no longer driven by the need for their approval, they lose the emotional leverage they used to keep the bond lopsided. Your neutrality alters the entire flow, making them realize the space they created did not just give them room to breathe, it gave you perspective. Once you have reached that level of composure, the avoidant senses it immediately. You are not impressed by their return. You are simply no longer tethered to their instability. There is no warmth and no immediate resolution. There is only self-respect. Show them that vanishing is not something you accept. When an avoidant returns, they frequently expect you to meet them with the same softness that made it easy for them to depart initially. They assume the exit they used is still wide open and waiting for them like a convenient escape route. They expect their absence to be ignored or forgiven simply because they chose to show up again. However, that is where your current self remains steadfast. Their return is not a celebration. It is a mirror of the consequences they authored. Avoidants do not come back because they suddenly matured. They return because the emotional safety net they relied upon has been pulled away. Your presence was reliable, your attention was steady, and your heart was predictable in a comforting way. When that vanishes, they feel a shift they do not know how to handle. That shift is not a gift for them. It is a realization. It is not your duty to ease the discomfort they caused. When they reach out, your task is not to fill the void of their absence with warmth. Your role is to remain centered and clear. Rewarding an avoidant's disappearance only conditions them to repeat the behavior. Every time you show excitement after they return, you validate the idea that distance costs them nothing and that silence will not alter your loyalty. You prove that disappearing is a convenience rather than a consequence. But when you react with measured energy, not cruelty, but self-respect, something significant occurs. They feel the boundary they never expected you to build. Your lack of immediate praise becomes a barrier they did not foresee. Avoidants thrive on the belief that you will remain reachable regardless of their actions. When they learn that access requires reliability rather than sporadic appearances, the dynamic changes for good. You are not dismissing them out of malice, you are rejecting the cycle. An avoidant can feel that instantly through your pacing and your lack of urgency. It informs them that the emotional landscape has shifted. You are not trying to win them back or keep the connection alive at any cost. You are not trying to make them feel at ease after they chose to leave you in unease. Instead, you are standing by your own standards. The reality is that avoidants only learn through firm boundaries, not through emotional cushioning. By refusing to validate their absence, you provide the one lesson they have dodged their whole life: that intimacy has value and distance has a price. It is not a matter of revenge, it is a matter of alignment. It is protection, not punishment. It is clarity, not coldness. Once they perceive that clarity, they finally understand what you have known all along. Access to you is a privilege, not a certainty. Simply ask what prompted them to reach out. This forces them to look at the gap between their distance and their current desire. Avoidants are most at ease when the emotional focus is off them and they can move in and out without explaining or taking ownership of the space they create. They flourish in ambiguity because it shields them from accountability. It lets them return without mentioning why they left, giving them the fantasy that the connection can be paused and resumed at their whim. One direct question breaks that fantasy. Asking what made them reach out now is not aggressive or confrontational. It is simply transparent. Clarity is what avoidants struggle with because it demands they acknowledge their own patterns and the pullback they treat as normal. This question invites self-reflection, something they have spent years dodging. It is a mirror they did not expect you to hold up. Avoidants return hoping to bypass the emotional truth of the situation, expecting you to be so glad they are back that you never mention their absence. When you ask a grounding question, you disrupt their autopilot. Suddenly, they are the ones expected to explain. They are the ones standing in the unknown, navigating vulnerability. The strength of this question lies in its simplicity. You are not accusing or demanding. You are creating accountability without the drama. They cannot hide behind hollow excuses about being busy when faced with your calm transparency. Your inquiry highlights the clash between their past behavior and their current return. If they required space, why are they here now? If they were not ready for closeness, what has changed? The avoidant feels this shift profoundly. Your tone stays steady, but the responsibility flips. For the first time, they must take emotional ownership instead of escaping it. Most importantly, you are not asking to fix things. You are asking to understand their intent. There is no desperation in this question, only discernment. This becomes a test for them. Can they handle the truth? Can they admit to their inconsistency? Whether they answer honestly or defensively, the response tells you everything. Are they seeking to reconnect or just trying to regain what they lost? Avoidants rely on your empathy, but when you remain guarded, they feel a real boundary for the first time. For a long time, your heart was an open door they could use without fear of consequence. You were the consistent presence they assumed would stay forever. Closing that emotional door now is powerful, not locked in anger, but closed with intention and self-respect. Being guarded does not mean being mean. It means realizing that empathy without limits is self-betrayal. It means refusing to give emotional space to someone who treated it as a convenience. Avoidants move through life thinking your compassion will always provide a way back. But when you protect your inner world, they meet a version of you that chooses personal healing over a shared history. Your boundaries are about honoring yourself, not punishing them. You are no longer offering the same availability by default. You are now intentional and selective. While avoidants fear responsibility, they also fear loss. When you stop providing free access to your spirit, it creates an internal conflict within them. Their desire for proximity finally meets the fear of actually losing you. This closed gateway compels them to confront the internal tension directly. It reveals to them the nature of true boundaries, not the variety born of resentment, but the kind rooted in self-worth. That is the barrier they cannot evade. By maintaining this emotional closure, you signal something they never anticipated. Their reappearance does not ensure your accessibility. You are not moved by their timing, nor are you swayed by their return. You refuse to shift your life to accommodate their sudden emotional curiosity. You have realized that entrance into your private world demands reliability, not abandonment. That is a status they must earn, not a gift you simply provide again. This emotional resolve is the precise moment they grasp the actual price of their avoidance. They are not merely losing a relationship, they are losing the person who tolerated the emotional discrepancy, the one who overextended and loved them in spite of their hesitation. Once you safeguard your own evolution, a permanent shift occurs. You cease being emotionally reachable to someone who only appreciated you once you were gone. Your caution becomes your power, and your power becomes the reality they were never equipped to handle. Utilize brief, steady replies. Avoid over-explaining, chasing, or performing emotional labor. They will detect the difference immediately. When an avoidant returns, they instinctively expect you to resume your former role, the one who eased their distance, clarified their silence, and sustained the connection single-handedly. They are used to you doing the heavy lifting, deciphering their mixed signals, and offering comfort even when they offered nothing. However, when you pivot to a state of reflection rather than validation, their entire support system fails. Avoidants feel most secure when you bridge the gaps for them, when you assume their motives are good and soften the blow of their inconsistency. The moment you stop doing that and let their actions represent them, they feel exposed. They aren't being judged or attacked. They are simply being seen, which is the very thing they have spent their lives running from. Mirroring their energy is potent because it turns their own behavior into a mirror they cannot ignore. Your concise, composed answers demonstrate a neutral state they never expected. You aren't trying to win. You aren't clinging to the bond or softening at their sight. You are simply matching the investment they provide. This is more unsettling to them than any loud argument. Avoidants are prepared to flee from intensity, but they are never ready for indifference. Your serenity removes their hiding places. Your directness eliminates their excuses. Your restraint forces them to see how little they actually contributed. Mirroring their frequency doesn't mean becoming a robot. It means matching their speed instead of running ahead. If they are slow to reply, you do not rush to answer. If they send vague notes, you do not overinterpret. If they offer the bare minimum, you do not compensate with depth. You keep your energy contained. You reflect rather than repair. In that reflection, they are forced to meet themselves. They aren't used to someone who doesn't hunt for reassurance. They are accustomed to exits, not accountability. Your balanced responses guide them to a place where they must either improve or walk away. Regardless of the result, your peace is preserved because validating nothing doesn't hurt them. It simply stops rewarding the habits that once exhausted you. You are creating a climate they have never known with you, one where their erratic nature gets no rise and their return gets no prize. They feel this shift at once, the lack of a safety net and the presence of a neutrality that was once unthinkable coming from you. In this space, they find the truth. Your heart is no longer in pursuit. Your energy is no longer saving theirs. You aren't hiding validation. You are simply no longer giving it away for free. That is when they realize they are no longer the center of your universe. Say clearly that you aren't interested in revisiting the connection and that you have moved on. Be simple and direct. Boundaries are about transparency, not punishment. Clarity is what they never expect because they are used to you diluting your truth to keep the peace. They remember the person who lowered their needs and swallowed their hurt to protect a connection that wasn't being protected by the other side. They expect you to waver or leave the door slightly ajar just in case they want to return. But when you set a boundary without emotional volatility, you present a version of yourself they aren't prepared for. A boundary stated calmly is a boundary built on growth. You aren't raising your voice, you are raising your expectations. You aren't rejecting them so much as you are choosing yourself. They can hear the difference in your tone and the simplicity of your words. You aren't asking for anything or waiting for a sign. You are simply defining the reality you now live in. That is what makes the boundary so absolute. Avoidants rely on your emotional flexibility and the hope that you will sacrifice your needs for their presence. They want you to soften the truth to keep them comfortable. A clean, grounded boundary is the ultimate end to that old dynamic. This leaves absolutely no space for misunderstanding. There is no emotional flexibility and no gaps for them to crawl through. It compels them to acknowledge that the bond they handled with such indifference is something you are now discarding with purpose. When you declare that you have moved on, you aren't attempting to persuade them. You are merely presenting a reality that you uncovered through restoration rather than through pain. The avoidant senses the gravity of that statement because it is not a reaction, it is a resolution. There is no emotional flare-up for them to hide behind, no conflict to redirect, and no intensity to use as an excuse. There is only your hushed confidence and their own inner realization that they are the architects of this result. Boundaries presented with a steady spirit establish the emotional responsibility they have spent a lifetime dodging. They cannot flee from it, they cannot downplay it, and they cannot twist it to shield themselves. Your composure forces them to face the truth that their disappearance was not a neutral act. It carried weight. Their silence was not hidden. It left a permanent mark. Their withdrawal did not keep them secure. It left them isolated. As you stand resolutely within your boundary, a transformation occurs within you as well. You recognize that you are no longer attempting to cling to someone who lacked the capacity to cling to you. You are no longer battling for a relationship defined by lopsided effort. You are no longer making yourself smaller to accommodate their anxiety. A transparent boundary is not the limit of your power. It is the evidence that you have finally learned how to respect it. This is why it strikes deeper than resentment ever could. Conclude the dialogue. Do not stay. Do not unlock the gateway again. Being the one to exit first strips away the final fragment of their emotional advantage. As long as the interaction persists, an avoidant can maintain a sense of command and a conviction that they still possess entry to your focus, your energy, and your presence. Avoidant individuals feel secure when they know you are still involved, still replying, and still impacted. Even if the discussion is impartial, your continued involvement allows them to keep a faint line of connection without providing any genuine closeness. But when you depart first, that line breaks, and it is the single result their internal wiring never anticipated. Avoidants function through the use of space. They are programmed to feel safe by regulating how near or far things remain. Upon their return, they expect to set the tempo, cautious, uncertain, and entirely on their own schedule. They reappear, assuming they still wield the emotional influence they once held, believing you will linger while they decide the depth of the interaction. Exiting first reverses that power structure immediately. It informs them that they no longer govern the access. Leaving the conversation with composure is not an act of desertion. It is achieving finality on your own terms. You are not departing in a rage, you are not inflicting a penalty, and you are not manufacturing conflict. You are simply opting to conclude the exchange with the same transparency you maintained throughout.